When Trump got in office and he mentioned that there's a deep state, they're like, you can't say that. What are you doing? And when he said, hey, when they asked him, why are you leaving your troops in Syria? And he said, for the oil. They're like, you can't. Yeah. He goes, no, it's for the oil. No, it's for liberty. It's for helping the people. Yeah. No, it's for the oil. It's our oil. And so he let the cat out of the bag, and they can't have that. That's what he blew the whistle on what's actually going on. Our wars are for oil. Our wars are economic wars, just like what's happening in Ukraine. This is an economic war. We're trying to put a hurt and isolate Russia. We're afraid of Russia and their natural resources and their manpower coming together with Germany with their technology and their capital. And we've been saying that for decades. And so that's why we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And that's why this Ukraine war is happening. And people have no idea what's happening. And what's worse is they have no idea that they have no idea what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. That's the crazy part. Can you play this clip? It's so interesting. When you watch this, the guy that's asking the questions is so calm and poised, and he gets rattled. Watch this.
To look at this and say the reason that the Russian army is on NATO, the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is because NATO has expanded rather than the Russians expanding. That, in other words, NATO has moved closer to Russia rather than Russia moving closer to NATO. Is that not an accurate way to look at this?
I think that's the way President Putin probably looks at it. It's certainly not the way that we look at it.
You don't think that NATO has expanded eastward toward Russia?
NATO has expanded,
okay.
and the expansion has been a good thing for.
So the reason that the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is not the fault of the Russian army. It's not the Russian army that's done it. It's NATO has moved closer to moved east.
I'm pretty sure it wasn't NATO who was ordering, upwards of 15 battalion tactical groups to within 10 kilometers of the border with Ukraine, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't NATO who put little green men inside Ukraine to destabilize eastern states.
I'm pretty sure that Ukraine is not a member of NATO. So unless that's changed.
It's not changed. But I'm pretty sure the movement by Russia is Russia's decision.
If NATO is moved east, the reason that the Russian army is closer or on NATO's doorstep is because NATO moved.
NATO is not an anti-Russia alliance. NATO is a security alliance.
Watch.
Unfortunately, for 50 years, it was an anti-Soviet alliance. So do you not understand it? So do you not understand how, or can you not even see how the Russians will perceive it as a threat? And the fact that it keeps getting closer to their border while their troops, I mean, the places where their troops are, you say their troops are, and may have been in Ukraine and Georgia, are not NATO members.
I'm not going to pretend to know what goes in President Putin's mind or Russian military commanders. I mean, I barely got a history degree at the University of South Florida. Right. What I can tell you is that NATO is a defensive alliance. It remains a defensive alliance.
Fair enough, but it has moved east. Correct? I mean, that's just a fact.
It has expanded, absolutely.
Right, exactly.
But there's no reason for anybody to think the expansion is a hostile, a threatening move. And we've been saying that throughout the last 15 years, man.
Like you're moving closer to Russia. You're blaming the Russians for being close to NATO.
No.
Yeah,
That's exactly what Hegel said.
We're blaming the Russians for violating the territorial integrity of Ukraine and destabilizing the security situation inside Europe.
Which is not a NATO member.
I see
other countries feel threatened.
There was a peace agreement in 2014. The CIA helped overthrow the Ukraine government. And then the people in the Donbass didn't want to go along with this coup government, right? Because the leader of Ukraine wanted to be friendlier economically with Russia instead of join like the European Union. And that they couldn't have that, right? So that's why they did a coup. And the people, the Russian speakers in the Donbass didn't want to go along with that coup. And so they kind of wanted to break away. Ukraine government started shelling the Donbass, and so they had a peace agreement called the Minsk Agreement, and that was supposed to give them independence. They were supposed to have their own elections, and they were going to stop shelling them. They never did. They ended up killing like 14 or 15,000 people in the Donbass over the last 8 years, and now it's been revealed that that peace agreement was never real. Merkel, the former prime minister of Germany, just admitted that the only reason they did that peace agreement was to give Ukraine enough time to build up its military, so when they finally did provoke an invasion, which is what they did, that they would have a military ready to fight Russia. And so people don't know this is what happened. Mm-hmm. And so they just think that one day Putin woke up and said, I want to go invade Ukraine because I'm a maniac. And they think that he's the bad guy. They think that he's acting rationally. We always knew he would do this. In fact, we were counting on him doing this. That's why we did what we did. And they don't know that Ukraine ramped up their bombing right before the war started last year. They doubled their bombing. They were really trying to provoke provoke it, and they did. And they provoked it, and the Russian would rather have a peace agreement. The rest of the world would rather have a peace agreement, not NATO, not Joe Biden, not the military-industrial complex. And so that's where we are. And people don't know that, and that's what that is. That guy's saying, "Hey, NATO's the ones expanding." The reason why he said it. The reason why that NATO's army is on the doorstep of Russia is because we moved, not Russia. And it's just obvious that we're the bad guys. The United States are the world's terrorists. We have 1,000 military bases. We have 400 military bases surrounding China since the Korean War. We just added 3 new military bases in the Philippines. They just announced 2 weeks ago. This is how all empires end. We're overextending militarily while we have people living under every bridge. People don't have health care, a living wage. Half the country can't afford a $500 emergency. 80% of workers live paycheck to paycheck. 50% of wage earners earn $30,000 or less. People go bankrupt when they get sick in this country. We have homeless people everywhere, and that's because our government is 100% corrupted.
It's the same thing with cancel culture. We are meant to exchange and have conversations with each other because we're all affected. And silencing people causes neurosis, mental health. And you're only going to back a person up against the wall to cause them to fight back. Or you'll create an underground subculture. You can look at that with Andrew Tate. You can try to cancel the guy from speaking about biological differences between men and women, men's and women's relations, men's mental health, what's going on with COVID. You can try to suppress this guy. You can even try to run an operation to even take the guy out. But all you're going to do is you're going to create a subculture, and it's going to go underground, and you're not going to stop it. It will still rise up, and it will still be a problem at the end of the day. And it's because you can't impose yourself and your worldview on an entire population. The universe always balances out itself. There's always a balance. When there was a huge rise in feminism coming up, there was an uptick in men coming up talking about men's mental health and men's social issues, and trying to draw a parallel to show this is the way things have been historically, and this is the reason why these things have been tradition between men and women, because you can be easily exploited. Corporations exploit, like I said, ladies all the time for their need for social inclusion. And unfortunately, that right now is what I see being weaponized, and they're turning a human rights into a gender-related issue. So please, I would ask the people of outside of Iran, have empathy for your own people. Understand, acknowledge the history of where you come from. Understand that there are people that do not have your people's best interest in mind.
I want to actually make it very clear that MEK does not represent Iranian people. Iranian people inside the country are brave enough to be their own representative. We are in a direct contact with them, and as Mr. Pahlavi and Nazanin mentioned, in our declaration, in our charter, we actually want to have a secular democracy. Those who do not believe in democracy, those who do not even engage with Iranians, they're not engaging with us to talk directly about what they want for the future of Iran. I'm very, very, very surprised at how they're being welcomed by the member of European Parliament, by some of the senators and member of the congressmen in America. So this is very clear.
You might want freedom for your people in some sort of way, even if it's superficial, and it's the freedom of going to movie theaters and, I don't know, essentially maybe feeling like Turkey, or feeling like that little 20-year period of Iran where you had, movies and you were able to see Gone with the Wind. I don't feel like that is the most important part of a culture. It's what's taking place, I would say, even in the Olympics that happened recently in Qatar. Qataris became very notable for doing that Olympics, for not assimilating to LGBTQ promotion that was going on there. And they didn't do that because they said we deserve to maintain our own sovereignty and our own integrity for how we manage our own country. We have our own beauty and our own uniqueness to that. And Qataris talked to Piers Morgan when he went to Qatar and said, you Westerners, you think we want to be like you, but we don't. we see what's going on in your country, how much division you guys have, how you guys are being exploited, how you guys are fighting over petty issues behind gender, and all of this degenerate dysfunctionality that you guys have taken place. You have children's story time with cross-dressing people and drag queens, and we don't need that. We have our own beauty, we have our own stability, and therefore we don't need your ideals. Also, another thing to bear in mind is that in the Middle East or in any country or whatever, you need allies. Life is about people. It's bigger than just yourself. So the fruit of life is within partnerships, whether that partnership is through a friendship or through a relationship. So you do need like-minded people to come together that have the same values to be able to help your people progress. And so between Sunni and Shia, I know that there's differences between both communities on the way they view imams and over a number of topics, but you do need allies. And unfortunately, it seems as though they're purporting that, some of the women in Iran are seemingly discounting the head covering or wearing of hijabs, which for certain, I'm not for sure how historical that has been an ongoing theme within the Islamic community, within the Shia community, within either Iraq or Iran or Afghanistan or any of these countries that they may have a population of Shia Muslims. But it's just unfortunate that, Iran and some of the ladies in Iran tend to be an outlier in regards to the discrepancy regarding head covering. And so that's something that can be discussed internally within Iran and something to be examined, but please understand that it's almost devaluing not only the religion to some extent, but it's also devaluing your culture. It's almost purporting a stereotype of that women in the Middle East are subjugated, which doesn't reflect well. Obviously, for other communities that are in the Middle East, they may not like the way that that's being purported, that, women that have head coverings seem to be subjugated and you're less than. And it's not flattering, towards other people. So something to bear in mind when talking about these things. Obviously, people shouldn't face any intense sort of violence or harm regarding attire, but there are strict rules in place because of them not wanting too much of a Western influence involved into the East. And the reason for that being is seeing how the West turned out, which in some ways it hasn't turned out in a very productive way. It's a social experiment. It's essentially social engineering. And if you look at the Kim Kardashians, the Cardi B's, these certain figures that should have programs going throughout the schools to show how harmful their message has been towards women, and the way that they've achieved their fame, whether that's Cardi B through, unfortunately, some degenerate activities of, adult film stuff, or her drugging men, or Kim Kardashian, who is the most famous woman on earth, and she's famous for lying that a man leaked her X tape, which unfortunately is not the truth. The truth of the matter is that her and her family conspired for that, and doesn't reflect well on other people that might be of Armenian descent or wherever. You got to understand that you are a cultural representation of your people, and everyone's culture does deserve to be respected, but you're undermining other people's religious beliefs, and in some regards, if you try to discount some traditional aspects that you have of your culture. And the reason why they have these traditions in place is that women care a lot for social inclusion, and unfortunately that care for social inclusion can mean that there's no limit to the type of things that they want for an experience, so that they can feel like they can fit in with the other girl. There's people that are in competition with each other from a social point of view, where they travel for social envy and they try to make themselves look like they're living their best life, and then it purports to another person to feel like they need to go out and go travel as well and do these certain things, and so it has influence. And because of that need for social inclusion, it's almost like there's not really a cap off on what can be a satisfier to a woman, so that's the reason why historically they've had these restrictions in place to try to make sure that women don't get caught up in their own need for self-experience and can stay logical about the bigger point of view, is that your purpose in life is not about your independence. It's about people. It's about partnerships and having a purpose in life, which results in children. Having children does give you purpose, and so it's beyond you. So that's the reason why there are and have been restrictions in place almost in every major religion throughout the world. So it's something to take into mind and value and to behold. So that's why people love the prestige that Middle Eastern people tend to have. And it was my first introduction into seeing a well-structured family and people that have values to themselves. And it's something you shouldn't lose because of fear you're losing out on cinema. Also, feminism might play a role into some of the aspects of things that have happened in Iran. Iran was westernized to a certain degree up until 79, and during the 70s, that's when feminism came into place, and I've touched on how that was a detriment to the African American community and what that caused for our people. It split our people, and we have not recovered from that. Till this day, it is still women versus men fighting for a sense of feeling important, and you're losing the actual biological historical reasons why men and women came together. We're on Earth right now because a man and a woman came together and gave us life. They birthed us. So there's beauty in our bond, and right now they're fracturing that and trying to separate the two and saying that there are differences between us and that we're equal. And there are differences between us, and we're not supposed to be equal. We serve a purpose just like women serve a purpose as well. For an example, in Ukraine right now, with the war taking place, women are able to necessarily either leave or they're staying underneath and they're providing food and rations for the men that are out fighting. Men are on the front line and they're fighting at this war. So if you don't know what your biological role on Earth is, get into a war zone. And you'll find out very quickly who's supposed to be defending the country, who's supposed to be protecting the kids. Women are there to protect children. Men are there to be the first line of defense. And so the burden and the brunt of a lot of stakes is on men in a lot of ways. And, it's our job to contribute and be able to provide on Earth where women and children are loved unconditionally. Men are loved under the condition we can provide something, and until we can provide something, we're not much of any value to the planet. And that's the issue with a lot of young men these days, and the reason why young men were attracted to Andrew Tate and his message, because it was explaining about how to build yourself. And yet there's programs all throughout the UK at the moment that are trying to de-escalate his influence because they're saying it's toxic. Maybe some of the ways that he found his initial start to providing some income obviously weren't ethical from a very religious standpoint or whatever, but he's moved out and he's transitioned from that point in his life, and he's given out very ethical messages on multiple subjects that are across the board, which is why he has peers in the Middle East, whether that's through Tam Cam or other figures that also back up his message, and people that understand his message about historical differences between men and women and traditional gender roles, and how that makes a very safe space for children when children aren't being left vulnerable for drag queen story time. So please bear that in mind, to keep your allies within the Middle East and keep people with you, because you already have this division between Sunni and Shia, and you don't need any more of that. You need people to be able to back you up and retain your autonomy so that you can be able to be respected and have your own point of view, and it helps balance out the earth, having these differences. You can be a moral juxtaposition when the West is lost in its own way, all right? Acknowledge your beautiful culture, your beautiful history of what you had in Iran, whether you want to view that straight from when Iran became a Shiite country, or if you want to look at that prior to that, back to when Zoroastrianism and Muslims in different countries all lived in relative harmony with each other, and value that. and think about the way in the future you want Iran to move forward in and what that means for your people. I'm sorry for some Iranians whose families felt and faced hard times during the revolution. I have heard stories of someone's mom being assaulted during the revolution, you know, and it caused other people to flee to other countries for whatever reason, whether they fled to Turkey and sought asylum elsewhere and, you know, became refugees and tried to nationalize or themselves inside of another country. I'm really sorry for those stories. You know, unfortunately, when countries change, there are rules that take place. Me personally, if I knew there was danger happening at protests, I would not have my child at a protest. I do not understand some of these youth students being out at protests and potentially being assaulted, being jailed, and it's exploitation of the youth in general. This is what's going on with Greta Thunberg and her whole purpose, where there's multiple things happening around the world. They just had this incident in Ohio that caused a huge chemical disaster. Do you see Greta Thunberg talking about this? No. They purposely target university-age students, specifically women, for social issues. And they get these women to go out and protest because women care for social inclusion. It's very easy to exploit women. Unfortunately, that plays a part in why, historically, through all major religions, they've had restrictions on women, because women care for social matters. And when you care for social matters, you can lose sight of how you can be disadvantaged and the effects of what, you know, socialism can cause to a certain degree. And you know, some people are unhappy in different countries because of socialism, North Korea being an example.
Do you know how North Korea became how it is today? When Kim Il-sung came, he made one promise to North Korean people. I'm going to feed you rice and meat stew each meal. And I'm going to get rid of all the inequality. If I do that, why don't you give me all your land and all your rights? We wanted no inequality, so we gave our land, our rights to this one guy. He took everything from us. So whenever in America I came, and people in Manhattan living in the best city in the world telling me passionately how America is so bad. So I asked them, so what is it so bad about America that you hate so much? And they say, you know what? We have inequality in this country. That's an amazing thing that you can rise to compared to other people. The enemy is of poverty, not inequality.
Hey guys, if you want to watch more clips, click here.
And if you want to watch the full podcast, click right here.